So then,
Uh,
it says right here, ESG now an essential element, but why is ESG now a key component of sourcing and vendor management strategies?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. It's we know that average is just not good enough any longer. And there is such a drive, and actually there's almost too much information out there about ESG. It's a bit like AI. I think everybody's sick and tired of hearing about AI this and AI that. But this is really about driving sustainable partnerships, sustainable programs of work, sustainable businesses across the board. So it's there are so many efficiencies to gain by following an approach utilizing ESG techniques that they have to be part and parcel of what we do. Yeah, and I guess just moving on to this slide, there are a number of key components around ESG, and it's really taking a bit of a route along the lines of sort of Sarbanes-Oxley, which we all remember well and absolutely hated, but it was a evil necessity. But building confidence through public reporting and investment and so on, it is very important. Is very important. So I've listed 9 areas of component areas that I think are important. On the sort of regulatory and government mandate side. You look at the EU, for instance, they've got the corporate sustainability reporting directive. It's pretty complex. It's mature, whereas the UK is pretty well behind. We've got a task force. I'm sure the new government will be looking at this, but the EU practice is maturing and needs to be observed. And of course, modern slavery acts are in place across most countries that are providing services, etc., to organisations that we're working with. But there are a number of businesses that have come into the frame recently about their working practices. I think Sheen, which is, I know through my daughter who seems to order every other day through them. They've recently been brought up about their working practices. Those businesses will lose ground and lose customers, but purely because they are not following some of those components within ESG.
Yeah, and just build on the point that John's made. I think there's we think about it a lot in the context of B2C, so direct to consumer type businesses, but it goes right the way through the supply chain. It goes B2B businesses. It's really important that they are doing the right things in terms of the way they provide their services, the way they provide the kind of underpinning technologies and the underpinning platforms that they provide their services on. So this is something which is gone from what you might call, when I remember getting involved with companies around corporate social responsibility, CSR, and kind of evolved into where we are today. There was a lot of lip service paid to this, but it's not lip service now. It's actually an intrinsic part of what businesses need to be thinking about when they're putting together the kind of ecosystem of way their services are delivered, and it reaches back all the way back in the supply chain to where those services are being originated. So I think it's gone way past the point of being something that people need to think about and fill in a form. They need to really think about it in terms of reaching back into the supply chain and the way those services are delivered.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that nicely brings on to number 2, which compliance is bound to increase. International standards exist now. ISO 26000, for instance. Carbon disclosure, the UN Global Compact Agreement, and so on. And no doubt these are going to mature and become things that need to be followed. So it's getting on that ladder to to build out, and it again feeds back into what we've talked about having that vendor management approach, that sourcing strategy. This is key for me. Onto things like risk management. It's all about eradicating risk. It's all about promoting the environment. About labour, and reducing disruption in supply chain. Interestingly, Harvard School did a bit of research on ESG, and it's now of the top 70 investment companies in the US, 43 is top of their list. This is happening now. I think with investors on number 4, it's about building that confidence. Again, Rob talked about some of the previous acts and tick box exercises that existed, but with social media and so on, you can't escape this. So public reporting is really important. Having an ethical stance and so on, breeding confidence in that in investments. And we work with private equity, and some of the pieces around due diligence are all about these components that I'm talking about now. Consumers are demanding ethical. I've touched upon that. It's a must.
And we were also fortunate enough to work with some of the top brands which are known globally as well as in region. And it's really important, how they are seen in terms of the way they deliver their products and their services. And it's really important that they're able to reach back, as I said earlier, and evidence that they are doing the right things, both by the way they receive services into them and by the way they're delivering them out into businesses or into the public.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We move on to the 6th point there about operational efficiency, and again, a number of studies have suggested that where ESG is now embedded in the way that they work, way that businesses process, that there's up to 20% operational efficiencies gained because of the way that they act and work, and this is really driving that operational efficiency piece. In fact, a McKinsey study backed that up, that 20% number, which is quite extraordinary, really. I talked about I talked about consumers and ethical and all that good stuff, but that I think all those things breed competitive advantage, and some of the things that Rob's touched upon is why we're talking about ESG in the context of sourcing, but also we're talking about it in our program management business area. When we're driving through programs of work, that we have an ESG element to everything we do within that program, and I can talk about that another time. We did touch upon innovation, collaboration, and I think one piece of research that's done. Unilever, for instance, they targeted themselves, for instance, on being 100% sustainable by 2020. They haven't hit that, by the way. They've reached 60 odd percent. But there are other cases where people like Telefonica, for instance, past 9 years, they've by adopting ESG, they've reduced their energy consumption and they've driven it through the business. And they've made an energy reduction of around 10% in a short period of time by adopting some of these practices. So it's very important. And I'll just go back last bit, the high level of transparency. It goes back to the Sarbanes-Oxley methodology. Being very transparent in what you do,